Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Maxwell. I'm the president of the Skoll Global Threats Fund, and today I have the honor of being your moderator. Because as hard as it may be to believe, when tsunami struck, we had no Twitter, we had no Facebook, we didn't have smartphones, and we didn't have Google Earth. We will likely see disasters bigger than the tsunami from 10 years ago. Will big data allow us to offer early warning? Will it allow us to minimize harm and improve our response? That is the focus of today's discussion.
The use of data and joining the data revolution should be one of the priorities of our humanitarian response. Humanitarian crises are numerous, they're very deep, and the system to address them is not broken, but it is broke. And we need to rethink the way that we address humanitarian crises. We need innovation to be able to have a more effective and efficient response. And we need to make much more use of, let me say, the resources that people who are affected by those crises themselves can give. And those resources range from their resilience and their reaching out to their neighbors to making use of the data they themselves collect on their cell phones. We are not using the data that are assembled by the refugees themselves, but maybe also not by agents, by humanitarian workers, in a way that is really helpful in our humanitarian response. And it's about time, I would suggest, that we start doing it, because the rest of the world is already way ahead of us. There are some challenges, and for me, I would say the biggest challenge is not, how much does it cost, or how are we going to assemble these data, and do we have the real appropriate technologies. The real challenge, of course, is the challenge around privacy. Because big data still reminds me, I was born in the 60s, and my coming of age was in the 70s, and of course we read Orwell, so big data is big brother. Now, I think in the way that we are going to talk amongst ourselves on how to use big data to innovate our humanitarian work, we should address the issue of the fear of big brother. And we should do it not because it's something that, I'm suggesting and I'm the minister, but because it's in everyone's mind. So we really have to address that issue, and it's also something where I would say I'm not pointing at you, I'm pointing at myself and governments, because we have to set the checks and balances. We have to think about the legal and the ethical frameworks to deal with that issue. So that's one. The second issue is, of course, a more pragmatic challenge, and it is that most of the data are assembled and stored and used by private companies. And although we speak a lot, especially we the Dutch, about working together with the private sector, this is uncharted territory. Partnerships with the private sector are really key. We want to work together. We don't want to have a free ride, but we have to think on how can we effectively work together and make use of the brains and the data that you have assembled. Then, of course, the third one is a challenge of awareness. We want to work with UN Global Pulse, with many of you here in the room, renew our commitments, also financial commitments, and we want to make sure that we make the best use of what's around in the area of new technology and big data. Not because it's fun or because everyone is doing it, but it can make our work much more effective and much more efficient. And looking at the current humanitarian crisis and the funding gaps that we see, and that we're not near closing them, we need innovation to deliver to the people who are in need. And I really invite you to work with us, to challenge us. And I do hope that this conference is just one of the steps that we can take together. And I look forward to this meeting, and I look forward to hearing your commitments and your ideas.
As Minister Ploumen has noted, we live in a digitally connected world, and as a result, we are awash in an ever-growing ocean of real-time information. as we move about, as we communicate, buy and sell goods, we search for information and share our lives on social networks. We're producing a vast amount of information merely as a byproduct of going about our daily lives. Private sector more than a decade ago recognized that in order to stay ahead of the curve, they had to be able to turn the data produced by their customers in real time into better, faster business decisions in real time, day by day, hour by hour, second by second. This is the data revolution, and it's happening all around us already, and it has profound implications for humanitarian action. For it turns out that disaster-affected populations are themselves prolific producers of big data. When our needs change, when crops fail, a deadly disease spreads, or a natural disaster strikes, we change what we say and what we do in ways that leave digital echoes. These are patterns that we can learn to recognize, patterns that we can act on to save lives. Populations with less access to communications networks are going to produce less data. There's no doubt about it. And data sources and tools are not anytime soon going to be able to replace, as the minister said, our situation reports, our needs assessments, our damage assessments. Data analytics does, however, offer significant potential to improve decision-making through better warning, real-time situational awareness, and providing an evidence base that we can study after the events to accelerate learning within our organizations. Today, 90% of the world's population lives in an area with at least one bar of cell signal. Every mobile operator in the world has the potential to produce this type of information. And by looking at big data from past disasters, we can begin to predict what to do better in the future. For the past 5 years at Global Pulse, we've been engaging private sector in innovation projects based on what we call data philanthropy. That is, finding ways for corporations to share data for R&D while fully protecting privacy and their own competitiveness in the market. Industries such as mobile, finance, and retail are increasingly opening their data to outside researchers. And increasingly, people all around the world are recognizing that the data they produce could be used to better their lives and to hold governments accountable for failing to deliver. There is not today a common agenda for the community of practice that's forming. It's fragmented and it's uncoordinated across sectors, geography, different types of data that different groups work with. I urge all of you to make sure that the World Humanitarian Summit is the moment when we finally mobilize key stakeholders around a common agenda for innovation in humanitarian applications of big data.
First of all, I'm sure all of you do know the World Food Programme, the largest humanitarian organization, assisting 80 million people in over 80 countries. And so a big organization, and we definitely need big data. There's no discussion there. We've been harnessing it. You've already heard some of the opportunities that we have been able to avail ourselves of. But I think, as Robert has described, it's great, but it's not enough, and it's not really keeping pace. The way we're using it is not keeping pace with the way it's developing. But probably one of the areas where it's really, really key, that is right at the core and the heart of our business, is understanding the vulnerability of the people we serve, what their needs are, what their status is. Now, traditionally, the way we've done that is, we developed what we refer to as VAM, which is Vulnerability Assessment and Mapping, of sort of knowing where the people are and the status. Now, that classically had been done by surveys, often people going out with a clipboard and ticking it off and everything. Now, the first thing that they get a lot of detailed information. It's hugely relevant, it's hugely important, but it's a bit slow. Our beneficiaries, most of them are carrying these, and our ability to develop surveys, develop questionnaires that can be sent out with that real-time data that comes back as digital data that can be analyzed, and compiled and put together. But more than that, if you need to update it 2 weeks later because something else has happened, you don't have to mount another huge survey. You can update one particular question or one particular part of it. You know who the respondents are, and so you know who they are, where they are, and what they need.
Thank you for inviting us to give some information on what Philippines has been doing with big data. It's something new to us, and it will be probably interesting for us to know how a developing country, which is quite prone to disasters, have made good use of big data. In the Philippines, we have used big data in the development of a timely mechanism for collecting and disseminating information on impending natural disasters such as tropical cyclones. An average of 19 to 20 typhoons comes to the country every year, many of them destructive. We have, government has started what it calls Project NOAA, National Operational Assessment of Hazards. It was established in June 2012, and it employs various sensors. So we get data from automated rain gauges, water level sensors, high-resolution topographic maps generated by LiDAR for flood modeling. But so this is very useful. We have real-time information on what's happening out there, but problem is we still have limited capacity, as maps generated are limited to certain areas around the country's 18 major river basins. But nonetheless, that's a good start. Now with NOAA, we also tried to develop a mobile app in Android and iOS devices. And this was jointly developed by our Department of Science and Technology and a large news media outfit to give information on the probability of rain, typhoon forecasts, temperature. We get images from Doppler stations, radar stations, and recordings from weather stations and others. And this provides us also very good information real time. The use of Twitter as a platform for disseminating government advisories and for collecting information from the ground. Hashtags were used during 2 typhoons in April 2015, and really saved lives and protected properties. Now, policy-wise, finally, to make big data very useful and relevant, we say there should be some ground shift in policy and institutional collaborations. There should be clear ground rules on data sharing. We're discussing this in the Philippines, and use of such data without harming considerations of privacy and individual liberty.
Thank you for your leadership in hosting this event and helping all of us to think through this very important challenge. One of the key issues that has been highlighted through the 8 regional consultations that lead up to the World Humanitarian Summit is actually tapping into the potential of big data. And I think between the untapped potential of data and the risk management, if we can put the 2 things together, I think there's a huge work that can be done to be able to address the challenges that we face in this area. Essentially, the data can transform the way in which we respond to humanitarian crisis. We can not only foresee crisis, but react much more quickly and allocate our resources much more efficiently. So I think we all agree there's a huge potential, but there are some challenges that I think that we face, and I would like to highlight 3. First is creating enabling environment, especially through connectivity, which is essential if we are to maximize the value of big data analysis in crisis. Because mobile networks are usually the first ones that actually get destroyed, and we need that for people to be able to communicate and connect. And this is why OCHA has been promoting the Humanitarian Connectivity Framework, which has won a commitment from many telecommunication companies to ensure mobile networks in crisis areas. And the second area is that we need a trusted framework, especially to facilitate the exchange and analysis of data between organizations, companies, governments, and the people. That means putting in place legislation that allows the private sector to release critical humanitarian data, and also organizing agreements, standards, and guidelines to facilitate public and private collaboration, and establishing a framework for the responsible use of data. I think that we are looking forward to working very closely with the Netherlands government and Global Pulse and other colleagues who are working in this area. We want to maximize the opportunity and then use that into really increasing and enhancing the humanitarian efficiency.
What we can demonstrate is that with the information that we have, we can not only help in natural disasters or epidemics, or we can also help in inferring socioeconomic levels of a region, number of people that are moving or that live in some areas, security levels of some geographic areas, traffic patterns. So there's a lot of things that we can obtain from the information that we have. We use this information in commercial agreements with a lot of people, and we are really ready and willing to do it with international organizations. We have two problems in order to do that. I would say first is our own culture, because our business is not the data, as in some other cases and companies. Our business is offering communications to people. We don't have the tradition of working in a meaningful way with data, and that's a cultural problem that we can solve, of course, but it is important. And then the second thing I would say is we have a regulatory problem. Let's say, not to discuss about that here, but that the OTTs have very light regulatory touch or regimes everywhere, while our tradition is that we have regulatory regimes that have been forbidding us for decades to work with data from our customers. And that's also the other reason for our cultural tradition.
So there are 6,000 tweets a second, every second of every day. It's a massive amount of data that's being produced. Increasingly, we think we are creating the largest archive of public, searchable human thought that's ever existed. And a big part of my job and my team's job is to help the world unleash the value of all of that data. When people ask me about, the power of Twitter data, I often say, think of it as having, kind of superhero powers, because you can know what the world is thinking about just about any topic at any moment in time. And what would you do if you had that superpower? Now, on the private side of things, there's been a lot of work going on for many years around Twitter data. And in fact, increasingly, I think the view from kind of the corporate side is that ultimately this type of data will be used in every business decision. A lot of the correlations are not direct, and so as we think about taking advantage of the data from a humanitarian perspective, a lot of I think the learning we're going to find is that we start with a hypothesis around something very direct. When people tweet this, it means X, but in fact we're going to find a lot of very indirect correlations that are just as important.